When Walter Mason asked if I could help out for a few weeks, he made it sound like an errand. Pick up groceries, sort some bills, maybe drive him to a few doctor appointments. I left behind a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, 3 freelance clients, and a life I had been carefully building one late night at a time. But family, right? The first thing Walter said when I walked through the heavy oak door of his estate was, "You look thinner in photos." "No thank you." "No, I'm glad you're here." Just a size critique delivered like a weather report. I dropped my bags by the staircase, fighting the reflex to apologize for my body. "It's good to see you too, Walter," I said, voice even. He nodded absently, already shuffling back toward the living room. I trailed behind, absorbing the silence that hung heavy in the grand halls of Mason Estate. The place smelled of old money and older grudges. Photos lined the walls, mostly of Walter shaking hands with mayors, CEOs, charity chairs. In not one was Samantha Blake present. I was background, a shadow, an accessory to his legacy. That first night I cooked dinner, something simple. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, steamed broccoli. He picked at the food without comment, like a diner absent-mindedly flipping through a menu he didn't order from. I tried not to let it sting. This was temporary, I told myself. Few weeks, maybe 2 months. Long enough for him to recover, regain strength, and start snapping at corporate underlings instead of me. But the weeks blurred. Appointments, prescriptions, meal planning, estate management. And still no gratitude. Just the occasional passive-aggressive observation. Vanessa would have ordered catering. More efficient. Or, Vanessa always knows which paperwork needs renewing. Vanessa, his golden girl. Married to his eldest son. Sharp as a whip. Dressed for war even at brunch. The woman who sent flower arrangements and perfect emails, and never showed up. But somehow she was the ideal. And I was just the girl with comfortable shoes and a smile he mistook for servitude. That night I sat on the back porch cradling a lukewarm cup of tea. The stars were blurred by the city glow. I typed a single line into the Notes app on my phone. Day 1. He doesn't see the scaffolding holding his house together. I closed the phone, sipped the tea, and whispered into the dark. I see you, Samantha. Even if he doesn't. Mornings at Mason Estate followed the same brittle pattern. Walter, in his robe, perched like a hawk at the breakfast table. Phone jammed to his ear. Voice sharp enough to cut glass. Get me Martin. No, now damn it. The Mayfield contract is hanging by a thread. If Vanessa were running this, we wouldn't be in this mess. I stirred cream into his coffee in slow circles, pretending not to hear. Pretending I wasn't invisible and indispensable all at once. The help. The extra set of hands. The warm body filling a cold house. Every few days some young man in a tailored suit would arrive, shoulders hunched under invisible weights, clutching folders thick with problems they didn't know how to solve. Walter would snap at them, sign papers with a dismissive wave, and shuffle back to the TV to watch financial news he no longer controlled. One morning I cleared the breakfast dishes just as one folder slid off the table. Instinct made me reach for it. The heading caught my eye. Mason Industries, client termination notices. I froze, plate still in hand. 3 names. 3 huge accounts. Gone. I tucked the folder back neatly and made no comment. Walter hadn't noticed. Or didn't want to. That afternoon, while Walter dozed in the den, a scotch balanced on his chest, I wandered into his study under the excuse of finding a novel. Dusty oak shelves lined the walls. First editions. Award plaques. Portraits of a younger, prouder man. On his desk, an abandoned quarterly report. I shouldn't have read it. I wasn't family. I wasn't a shareholder. I wasn't even technically staff. But I was tired of pretending blindness. I flipped through the pages. Margins squeezed so tight you could hear them gasp. Expenses spiraling. No new client acquisitions in 3 quarters. And yet, the PR machine still churned out stories about Mason Industries' unshakable leadership and forward momentum. A beautiful lie. Printed in glossy ink. My throat tightened. Walter wasn't just getting old. His empire was quietly, irrevocably crumbling. I gathered my courage, closed the report, and tiptoed back to the guest room, heart pounding like I'd stolen a crown. That night I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan spun lazy circles above me, slicing the silence into quarters. I opened my laptop, hands trembling, and started a new file. Mason Industries Risk Log Private. Row by row, I entered everything I remembered. Mayfield's abrupt withdrawal. 2 lawsuits hinted at in passing. Vendor payments delayed. Lease renewals under negotiation. Read, they couldn't afford the new terms. I wasn't looking for blackmail material. I was looking for the truth. Because someday someone was going to ask, "Did you know?" And I wanted to be able to say. I paid attention. The next morning, Walter shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his temples. "Vanessa's flying in next week," he grumbled, pouring his own coffee for once. "Maybe she'll knock some sense into legal." I said nothing. He stared into his mug like it held answers. "Not like you understand this stuff," he muttered. And there it was, the gut punch. The casual dismissal. I smiled softly and wiped down the counter. Inside, another quiet promise took shape. One day when the storm hit, I wouldn't be standing in the wreckage asking what happened. I'd already be building something stronger. Thursday night was the kind of evening that made you believe nothing ever changed in old families. A dinner party. Business partners invited. Crystal glasses polished. Expensive steaks delivered from a boutique butcher who never asked about the invoices piling up. Walter ordered everything, then barked at me to help set up, as if I were housekeeping. I plated appetizers, adjusted candles, straightened linen napkins, and tried not to think about how I had once organized leadership summits for Fortune 500 companies, before trading my career for helping out. At 7 sharp, the doorbell rang. First came the partners. Middle-aged, polished, smelling faintly of ambition and fear. Then came their wives, lacquered hair, bright nails, laughter that only broke for gossip. Walter greeted them with the kind of warmth he never reserved for me. "John, look at you. 20 pounds lighter, I swear. Linda, still making the rest of us look old." He introduced everyone with grand gestures. Everyone except me. I stood there holding a tray of shrimp cocktails, smiling like a well-trained extra in a movie about a life that didn't include me. "Sam," he barked once when someone needed a refill. No title. No acknowledgement. Just Sam. The girl who fetches things. The evening slid into a predictable rhythm. Steak, wine, talk of mergers and markets, dry chuckles about kids these days. I moved between rooms, invisible, gathering plates, refilling drinks. At one point, while clearing a half-empty glass of Cabernet, I caught snippets of conversation from the study. How long can Walter hold it together? The Mayfield exit gutted their numbers. Vanessa should really be stepping up. Not once did anyone mention Mason Industries employees. The families depending on paychecks. The communities built around those factories. Only margins. Only PR optics. At dessert, Walter regaled everyone with a story about the early days, back when deals were made with handshakes and gut instinct. He didn't notice my hand trembling as I placed slices of lemon tart on bone china plates. He didn't notice the way John, his supposed friend, smirked behind a wineglass when Walter slurred a detail. He didn't notice how Linda went slightly when Walter insisted we're bigger than a few setbacks. He didn't see any of it. But I did. I carried it all back to my guest room like another tray, heavy, delicate, and not mine to drop. That night, under the muted whir of the ceiling fan, I added a new entry to my file. Day 26, even the vultures are circling. I stared at the screen for a long time. Was this loyalty? Was this love? Or just the inertia of a man too proud to see the ruin he carried like a crown? Maybe it didn't matter. Because the truth was, Mason Industries wasn't waiting to collapse. It was already falling. And nobody at that table, not John, not Linda, not even Vanessa, was coming to catch it. Certainly not me. Not anymore. The morning after the dinner party, Walter was in a rare mood. Still drunk on flattery, still clinging to the illusion that a few handshakes over dessert could patch the cracks he refused to see. "I need to draft a new statement," he said, waving vaguely toward his laptop. "Something strong. Reassuring." I wiped down the counter. "You could try transparency," I suggested carefully. He snorted. "Leave the PR to people who understand the business, Samantha." I smiled tightly. Understanding the business? I understood it better than he thought. Because business isn't just numbers and logos. It's people. It's promises. Walter saw assets. I saw weightless futures slipping through greedy fingers. That afternoon, while he napped, I pulled out my laptop. Not his. Mine. Old, battered, keys shiny from years of late-night hustles. I opened a blank email and stared at it. I could still walk away, I thought. I could pretend I hadn't read the termination notices. Pretend I hadn't overheard John muttering about liquidation scenarios between sips of whiskey. I could do what Walter expected. Smile, nod, refill the coffee, stay silent. But I didn't. Instead, I dug through my old contacts until I found him. Daniel Reed. Business strategist. Sharp, discreet, relentless. Someone who didn't flinch at ugly numbers. I typed, "Hi Daniel. Hope you're well. I have a theoretical question about legacy businesses facing sudden liquidity threats. Off the record. Would you have 15 minutes? I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The reply came in less than an hour. Call me. Burner phone. Now. I grinned despite myself. Some bridges are worth keeping lit, even when the roads they connect are on fire. I called. Daniel's voice was the same, brisk, skeptical, no nonsense. He asked for facts, not feelings. I gave him the outline, careful to omit names. He asked sharper questions. Margins? Lease renewals? Client churn? I answered as best I could from memory. There was a long pause. Then he said, "If this were my client, I'd say you have 6 months. Tops. Maybe 3, if Mayfield's withdrawal triggers supplier defaults." I swallowed hard. 6 months. 3 if they got unlucky. "Thank you," I said. "You're smart," he said bluntly. "Smarter than whoever's driving that ship straight into an iceberg." I laughed, but it caught in my throat. After the call, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt awake. Later, as Walter sat watching stock tickers crawl across his flat screen, sipping aged scotch like it could age his problems into oblivion, I opened my file again. Added a new entry. Day 27. When the roof collapses, the scaffolding won't save him. I closed the laptop. Outside, a storm brewed thick, purple ready. I leaned against the window frame, feeling the first heavy drops hit the glass. I wasn't the storm. I wasn't the rescue. I was the witness. And I would not look away this time. It started with an envelope. Thicker than usual. Stamped urgent. Hand-delivered by a courier with a clipboard and a fake smile. Walter tossed it onto the hall table like junk mail. "Probably Mayfield's legal team whining again," he muttered. "I'll get to it later." But later never came. Walter fell asleep in the den after lunch, TV humming stock market nonsense in the background. I stood by the table, staring at the envelope. I should have left it alone. But I didn't. My hand shook slightly as I slit the edge open with the letter opener. Inside, 30 pages of proposed renegotiations. Mayfield wasn't whining. They were preparing to buy out one of Mason Industries' core subsidiaries, for a fraction of its worth, exploiting a loophole Walter's legal team had missed when he fired half of them in a cost-saving initiative. My stomach twisted. If he signed this, it wouldn't just be a blow. It would be a death sentence. I paced the hall, heart hammering. Options tumbled through my mind. Tell Walter. Be dismissed. Again. Tell Vanessa. Risk her twisting it to her advantage. Do nothing. Let them fall. Or, option 4. I pulled out my phone. Texted Daniel Reed. Emergency. 911. Call me. The phone rang before I could blink. I explained, breathless, fast, cutting corners where I had to. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then, send me a scan. Now. Before they notice. I didn't hesitate. I snapped quick, shaky photos and emailed them under the subject line. Critical contract review, urgent. Minutes later, Daniel responded. You're right. It's bad. I'll draft a counterproposal tonight. Whatever you do, stall signing. I exhaled shakily. Stall. I could do that. I printed out a clean copy of the contract, slipped it into a new envelope and scribbled a note. Urgent. Pending outside counsel review. When Walter woke up groggy and irritable 2 hours later, I handed him the envelope without flinching. What's this? He barked. Legal flagged inconsistencies. I lied smoothly. They recommend holding all signatures pending a second review. He frowned. Looked at the envelope like it bit him. Hell. Fine. Later. He tossed it onto a side table again. And I knew later meant never. But I had bought a little time. Enough for Daniel to prepare a shield. Enough, maybe, to keep Mason Industries breathing. That night I sat by the window, legs curled under me, watching the rain slash across the driveway. I wasn't naive. Saving Mason Industries wouldn't make Walter see me differently. It wouldn't earn me a seat at his table. But I wasn't doing it for him anymore. I was doing it for the girl with calloused hands and tired eyes who refused to pretend she didn't see the cracks. For once, I wasn't the background noise. I was the one holding the storm back. The invitation came folded inside a memo Walter barely glanced at. A board strategy session at the downtown Mason Industries Tower. Private. Limited attendance. Walter grunted, tossing the paper toward me like it was a dirty napkin. Bring the files, he said. And try not to talk. Not would you come. Not thank you for the work. Just, fetch. Carry. Silence. But I tucked the invitation into my bag, fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something sharper. Anticipation. I spent the night combing through reports. Quarterlies. Annuals. Forecasts. PR spin. Market analyses. I highlighted everything Walter would gloss over. Everything that could cost him and everyone else dearly. At 9 a.m. sharp, I stepped into the mirrored elevators of Mason Tower, my cheap flat squeaking against the marble floors. I wore my plainest dress. Pulled my hair into a low knot. No makeup except a thin line of eyeliner I drew like armor across my lids. I wasn't here to impress. I was here to survive. The boardroom was colder than I remembered, all glass and chrome and 2 bright lights. 12 men in suits. 2 women, both younger than I expected. And Walter, planted at the head of the table, radiating a confidence he no longer deserved. He didn't introduce me. Didn't even acknowledge my presence. I slipped into a chair along the wall, legal pads and contracts stacked neatly in my lap. Invisible. Useful. Replaceable. Or so they thought. The meeting started slow. Quarterly reviews, projections, risk assessments, the usual self-congratulatory cycle of willful ignorance. Until George Langford, one of the senior partners, cleared his throat. I heard we had a near miss with Mayfield. Walter stiffened. Handled. Internal adjustments. George's eyes slid to me. And who flagged it? He asked smoothly. The room shifted. Walter hesitated. No one spoke. I could have kept quiet. I could have pretended not to understand. But something inside me, maybe that same spark that made me send Daniel the email, refused. I raised my hand slightly, heart slamming against my ribs. I did, I said quietly. A beat of stunned silence. George nodded. And your assessment now? I swallowed. Straightened my spine. Looked 12 men and 2 women and 1 crumbling king square in the eye. There are vulnerabilities across client retention, liquidity reserves, and supply chain resilience, I said calmly. PR can't fix insolvency. A few brows lifted. Someone, a junior board member, scribbled something furiously into a notebook. Walter's face darkened like a gathering storm. But George smiled thinly. Impressive, he said. Perhaps we should hear more from Miss. He trailed off. Samantha Blake. The name they had never bothered to learn. I said it for them. Blake. Samantha Blake. I stayed for the rest of the meeting. Not in the corner. Not invisible. Taking notes. Answering questions. Proposing solutions Walter should have proposed himself. When the session ended, George shook my hand. Smart women don't stay secret long, he murmured. I didn't smile. I didn't thank him. I just gathered my things and left. On the way down the elevator, my reflection caught my eye, small, plain, steady. I thought. You are not a shadow. Not anymore. Walter cornered me the moment we got home. Dropped his keys on the marble console with a clang that echoed through the empty halls. You embarrass me, he snapped. I hung up my coat calmly. Turned to face him. How? I asked, voice even. You undermined me. His face flushed red. You spoke out of turn, you made it look like I can't control my own company. I wanted to laugh. Control? He'd lost that months ago. I was just the first person who stopped pretending otherwise. Instead, I said, I answered a direct question. He barked a bitter laugh. You think you're clever, don't you? A few fancy words and a couple of graphs and suddenly you think you understand legacy business. Legacy? The word hung between us like a noose. Walter didn't want Mason Industries to survive. He wanted his version of it to survive, bloated, outdated, blind. He stepped closer. Too close. You're just temporary, he said, voice low. An accident of circumstance. Don't get ideas. For a moment, the old reflex flared inside me. Apologize. Minimize. Shrink. But I didn't. I looked him in the eye and saw not a titan. Not even a villain. Just a scared old man gripping crumbling power with both fists. No, I said quietly. Walter blinked. No, he repeated as if he couldn't comprehend it. I picked up the folder I had left on the hall table, my risk assessment, still neat and unopened. Held it between two fingers like something fragile and worthless. No, Walter, I said. I'm not an accident. I turned. Started up the wide staircase, each step loud against the hush of the house. Behind me, Walter sputtered a half outrage, half confusion. I didn't stop. I didn't explain. At the landing I paused. Spoke without looking back. You're the one who built this house on sand. I'm just the one who finally said it out loud. The rest of the night passed in a tense, seething silence. I packed my laptop, my notes, my dignity. Moved my things into the guest cottage without asking permission. Because permission was no longer required. From the small attic window of the cottage I could see the great, hollow house silhouetted against the night, grand and fading. It didn't feel like a palace anymore. It felt like a mausoleum. And I wasn't staying to be buried inside it. The email came the next morning. Subject, Strategic Operations Consultant Offer. From George Langford. CC, entire board. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. They were offering me a contract. Not a favor. Not a temporary courtesy. An official role. Authority. A real voice. Attached. Salary proposal generous. Terms of autonomy broad. Project timeline aggressive. The offer came not from Walter, but from the people who actually understood where the future was headed. I leaned back in the rickety chair of the guest cottage, staring at the cracked ceiling. This should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt complicated. Accepting meant stepping fully into the machine I had spent months resenting. It meant working alongside men who once couldn't be bothered to remember my name. It meant sharing oxygen with Walter Mason, even as his empire quietly shifted into new hands. But rejecting it? That felt like setting fire to a bridge I had bled across. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, listened not to fear, not to pride, but to the small, stubborn voice that had been getting louder lately. You didn't come this far to keep serving someone else's kingdom. You came to build your own. That afternoon, George called. Miss Blake, he said smoothly. We're very impressed. We'd be lucky to have you officially. I smiled faintly into the phone. I appreciate that, I said. And I'm honored by the offer. Pause. But I'm not sure I want to rebuild something that refuses to admit it needs rebuilding. George chuckled, unbothered. You're shrewder than most of the men in that room. I didn't reply. He continued. Tell you what. Think about it. If Mason Industries isn't the right fit, maybe we find a new one. Together. That made me pause. Together. Not under. Not behind. Beside. I'll think about it, I said. And I meant it. I hung up, closed the laptop, walked outside barefoot into the crisp autumn afternoon. Leaves crunched underfoot. The wind smelled like something ending and something beginning. I wasn't just standing on the edge of someone else's kingdom anymore. I was standing at the threshold of my own. And all I had to do was step through. I spent 2 sleepless nights drawing diagrams on scrap paper. Not Mason's diagrams. Mine. A lean consulting firm. Independent. Agile. Built for companies who didn't want to patch old wounds, but wanted to build new foundations. I didn't have millions in seed funding. I didn't have a famous last name. But I had something better. Receipts. Relationships. And resilience. On the 3rd morning, I took a taxi downtown, past the glittering towers I once believed held all the power. They didn't. Power was the girl carrying a cracked leather folder, walking into a meeting she wasn't invited to, and leaving with the room. I booked a co-working space. Registered the LLC. Blake Strategies. Clean. Sharp. Mine. First call? George Langford. Ms. Blake, he said, amused. You're early. Not for a job, I said. For a partnership. He didn't laugh. He listened. I laid out my proposal. Operational triage for Mason Industries. Independent consulting arm to clean internal systems. No full employment, contractor status. No loyalty oaths. No borrowed crowns. George grinned halfway through. You're bolder than I thought. Better to build scaffolding outside the house, I said, than die inside it. An hour later, I walked out with my first signed contract. My first real contract. Not an accident of circumstance. Not a favor. Earned. Built. The next day, Walter called. He left a message, terse, forced. You could have stayed, you know. Things could have been different. I didn't call back. Because things were different. And I wasn't asking permission anymore. That night, I sat at my tiny desk in the guest cottage, the same place where I'd once stared at ceilings and ceilings of excuses, and I lit a small candle. Not for hope. Not for memory. For truth. Because I hadn't just survived Mason Industries. I had outgrown it. And now? It was time to build something worth standing inside. 3 months later, Blake Strategies had 12 clients. A team of 5. An office with real windows and cheap coffee that somehow tasted sweeter. Some days were chaotic. Some nights were sleepless. But every moment was mine. Mason Industries? Still struggling. Still pretending. I consulted for them twice. Cleaned up the messes Walter refused to admit existed. I never met with him directly. Requests came through intermediaries now. Polite. Respectful. Detached. Exactly the way I wanted it. One afternoon, walking out of a meeting, I ran into Linda, Walter's old ally, in the lobby. She blinked in surprise. Took a moment to place me. You look different, she said finally. I am, I said simply. No need for explanations. No need for permission. Linda hesitated, then smiled awkwardly. We could use your advice on something. Of course you could, I thought. But I said nothing. Not yet. Instead, I tucked my notebook under my arm, nodded, and kept walking. Because the victory wasn't just in the contracts signed or the titles gained. The victory was in the silence. The dignity. The knowledge that I had built something real, something no one could erase by forgetting my name. That night, I stood by the office window, watching the city lights flicker and hum like living things. No fanfare. No champagne. No headlines. Just one steady truth, written into the bones of every deal, every plan, every late night. I wasn't temporary. I wasn't replaceable. I wasn't invisible. Not anymore. I closed my laptop, turned out the lights, and walked into a future I had built with my own hands.